Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group where we study the words of the Buddha. We're in Volume 6, which is titled The Natural Law of Kamma. We're studying chapters 11 through 20 today, where a student or myself will be reading the individual chapter of the words of the Buddha. Then I'll be sharing some brief teachings on that particular chapter, and then open up to any questions that you guys might have related to the teachings of the Buddha in that chapter that we just studied. So if you guys have been reading these chapters before class, or if you're reading them after class, this study group is meant to help you to be able to navigate through the teachings of the Buddha, learning them, reflecting on them, and practicing them. Where the group learning program that I teach on Sundays and Wednesdays, that's more of a foundational program for people who are just getting started, where this program tends to be people who already have a really solid foundation in the teachings of the Buddha to then be able to study directly with the words of the Buddha. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly. We usually start this class with a brief meditation, but I'm going to forego that for this particular class session so that we can move right into the actual teachings, since some of the chapters have a bit more words with them than typical. So if you guys have questions as we go through the class, you can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section. I'll be able to see those. If you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand to ask any questions or to volunteer for reading if you would like. So the first chapter here is chapter 11. It's titled To Do an Action. Here the Buddha is going to be talking to his son Rahula. A lot of times people think that the Buddha left his family and never came back, but this is actually untrue. He is here and in other places teaching his son Rahula, who ordained with him as a novice monk in order to get to enlightenment during his lifetime and build up his practice to the point where he ultimately went from novice to ordained and ultimately attained enlightenment during his lifetime. So I'll read this chapter, unless there's people in Zoom who would like to volunteer. I'll just read these chapters and then teach you one by one, and then open up to any questions that you might have. So this chapter, To Do an Action. Rahula, when you intend to do an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus: would this action that I intend to do with the body lead to my own harm or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both? Is it an unwholesome bodily action with painful consequences, with painful results? When you reflect, if you know this action that I intend to do with the body would lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both, it is an unwholesome bodily action with painful consequences, with painful results. Then you definitely should not do such an action with the body. But when you reflect, if you know this action that I intend to do with the body would not lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both, it is a wholesome bodily action with wholesome consequences, with wholesome results. Then you may do such an action with the body. Okay, so here, this is the first chapter of about 3 chapters where the Buddha is going to walk you through how to reflect on a particular action first, and then how to reflect on a action as you're actually doing it, and then afterwards, and providing you guidance of what you should do in this particular situation. Well, here he's talking about a bodily action, that if you are about to take a particular bodily action and you're reflecting on it and you realize that this is going to cause harm to yourself, to others, or to both, then this is going to have painful consequences and painful results, and you shouldn't actually do this bodily action because it would be unwise, because anything that you put out in terms of harm is going to come back to you. And here the Buddha is talking about bodily actions, but remember from our last class where the Buddha was teaching about the natural law of Kamma, there's 3 types of actions. There's bodily actions, there's verbal actions, and there's mental actions. So while here he's talking about bodily actions and reflecting on that prior to doing something to determine whether it's harmful or not, either to yourself, to others, or both, you could actually look at this as not just bodily actions, but verbal actions and mental actions as well. Anytime you notice that something you're about to do with your bodily actions, with your verbal actions, or any actions going on in the mind, any mental activity, if it's going to be harmful to you, to others, or both, you should certainly not do this particular bodily action. But if you notice that it is something that is not going to cause harm to yourself, to others, or to both, then this is going to result in wholesome consequences with a wholesome result. And then you might decide to do that particular bodily action. Because based on the natural law of Kamma, you're looking to extinguish all your unwise decisions that are leading to unwholesome results. And you're looking to only create wholesome, wise decisions that lead to then wholesome results. This is part of what we were talking about in our last class. So in order to do that, you're going to need to reflect on the things that you're actually about to do so that you can determine whether or not it's going to be harmful or not. And as you do this more readily, then you'll have the wisdom to know. Initially, you might need to go through some thinking and pondering to decide. You might even need to reach out to your teacher and ask for help or ask for guidance in certain situations. But as you do this one by one on particular situations, you'll start cultivating more and more wisdom, which then will be deeply rooted in the mind. And this wisdom will then be there for you to use in certain situations, where initially it might be a little bit more cumbersome or a little bit longer time for you to think and ponder over certain bodily actions, verbal actions, or mental actions. But over time, as you cultivate the wisdom about each thing that you're looking to do, then you won't need to think and ponder because you've done that work and you've acquired that wisdom to know whether something is harmful or not. So as you need help with this, you can certainly reach out in these classes in certain ways. You can post in Facebook group, you can send private message, or you can schedule a personal guidance session. Anytime you need help, you can reach out and I will help you. And then over time, you accumulate this wisdom and you'll have it on board and available to you in certain situations where you need it. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here, so let's move on to our next chapter, which is chapter 12. This one is titled, While Doing an Action. Also, Rahula, while you are doing an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. Does this action that I am doing with the body lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both? Is it an unwholesome bodily action with unwholesome consequences, with unwholesome results? When you reflect, if you know this action that I am doing with the body leads to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both, it is an unwholesome bodily action with unwholesome consequences, with unwholesome results. Then you should suspend such a bodily action. But when you reflect, if you know this action that I am doing with the body does not lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both, it is a wholesome bodily action with wholesome consequences, with wholesome results. Then you may continue in such a bodily action. So again, this is very similar to the last chapter that we just studied, where the Buddha is helping you to see that you should be reflecting and have awareness of what you're doing in a particular situation. So if you maybe didn't fully reflect at the beginning and now you're in the action of actually doing something and you realize while you're doing it that it's harmful and it's causing unwholesome consequences and unwholesome results, or it will cause unwholesome consequences or unwholesome results, then you should suspend that action. You should stop doing that. You should cut off and let go. Even if you're midway through doing something or you've just started something, you can train the mind to let go. So this is what you'd like to do, not only with bodily actions, but verbal and mental as well. That while you're doing a bodily action, while you're having a certain verbal action or a certain mental action, even if you're mid-sentence in a verbal action, cut that off and let it go. If you realize that it's harmful, it's unwise, it's going to lead to unwholesome consequences. And then if you're doing things that you know that are wholesome and they're wise, that they're going to lead to wholesome consequences, then continue to do that and have the wisdom to know what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what is going to produce unwholesome results and what is going to produce wholesome results, what is unwise and what is wise. This is the wisdom that you're cultivating as part of this path. And like I said, where you need help, you can reach out for those kinds of situations. Or if you've already done something and you're not quite sure, you can reach out for that as well. But more and more, as you get this wisdom on board, you'll be more and more confident in any kind of actions that you're doing, whether it's bodily, verbal, or mental, and you won't be conflicted of whether or not this is going to cause harm or not, because you'll know with 100% certainty based on the natural law of Kamma. That's essentially what you're awakening to, as we talked about in the last class, is in terms of awakening to enlightenment, you're awakening to this natural law of Kamma and other natural laws as well, but this is a primary thing that you're awakening to. So you would like to gain the wisdom of this natural law of Kamma as you're making decisions in life. You can observe the Kamma that's coming back, observe the results that are coming back. The natural law of Kamma is the most unbiased teacher that you will ever find. It doesn't matter who you are, what level of society, how much money or how little money you have. The natural law of Kamma is going to affect you. And as you make decisions in the world, either wise or unwise, you can read what's coming back to you to determine whether you're experiencing wholesome results from that or unwholesome results. And this will help you to learn and to awaken, to gain wisdom of this natural law of Kamma. And then more and more, you can ramp down your unwise decisions that are leading to unwholesome results and ramp up your decisions that are wise that lead to wholesome results. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here, so I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 13. This one is having done an action. So you've already done the action. The first two were prior to the action or while you're doing the action. Now we're going to look at after having done a particular action. Also, Rahula, after you have done an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus: does this action that I have done with the body lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both? Was it an unwholesome bodily action with unwholesome consequences, with unwholesome results? When you reflect, if you know, this action that I have done with the body leads to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both, it was an unwholesome bodily action with unwholesome consequences, with unwholesome results. Then you should confess such a bodily action, reveal it, and lay it open to the teacher or to your wise companions in the holy life. Having confessed it, revealed it, and laid it open, you should undertake restraint for the future. But when you reflect, if you know this action that I have done with the body does not lead to my harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both, it was a wholesome bodily action with wholesome consequences, wholesome results. You can reside peaceful and joyful, training day and night in wholesome states. Okay, so here what the Buddha is describing is if you've actually done something already and you reflect and you realize that it was unwise and it's going to lead to unwholesome results, he's saying that you should seek the guidance of a teacher. Oftentimes when you see this word confess, when the Buddha is talking about this, if it brings up ideas of other traditions that you might have been involved in, where you're taught to go confess something and then you're giving a penalty or some kind of punishment for that, that's not what the Buddha is teaching you here. Instead, what he's saying is to lay it open to the teacher, meaning that you go seek guidance either from your teacher or from wise companions in the holy life, people who are on the path to enlightenment, who have a lot of wisdom about the path, and that way the things that you've done, you can get guidance on that. Because if you don't share with people the challenges and the struggles and the difficulties that you're experiencing, you won't be able to get help. So you'll just be continuing to do these unwholesome things over and over and over again without actually gaining the wisdom that you need to improve. So the Buddha says here, having confessed it, meaning having talked to your teacher or some wise companions in the holy life, meaning other people who are on the path to enlightenment, having revealed it and laid it open to them. Talk openly. Tell the people all the things that you're struggling with. There should be no judgment from your teacher to you or to your wise companions in the holy life. There should be no judgment at all, because anybody who's enlightened, they've already done a lot of unwholesome things at some point in their life, or else they wouldn't have been able to cultivate the wisdom to improve. So at some point in their life, they would have done these same unwholesome things, and they should have understanding and loving kindness and compassion. So when you reveal your challenges and laying open the struggles and difficulties that you're having, they probably have overcome those same struggles, and that's why they'll have the wisdom to be able to then help you. So they've struggled with those same things, but they overcame those obstacles, and that's why you can seek guidance from them. And then once you seek that guidance, you can take restraint for the future. It doesn't mean that just because you seek guidance once and you learned once that you're going to instantly be able to fix and resolve the things that you've learned about. So you might have to go to your teacher or to your wise companions more than once and share with them each individual situation that you're really struggling with and you need help with. So there's no expectation from me to students that once I teach you something once that you've got it and you're going to master it the first time. So if you need to ask a question multiple times or different parts of the same situation, maybe you're reducing the amount of harm little by little each situation, but you're still stumbling over certain aspects of that situation. You might need to reach out for help multiple times with a similar type of situation that's reoccurring over and over and over again. But each time you learn some wisdom, work to restrain the mind more and more. And as you do, what the Buddha is saying is, okay, if you've done a bodily action that doesn't lead to harm of yourself to others or both, then you can reside peaceful and joyful, knowing that you haven't caused any harm to anybody. But it's going to take you cultivating wisdom in reflecting before an action, during an action, and afterwards to build up that wisdom and know that you haven't caused any harm to anyone whatsoever in what you're doing. And then you can reside peaceful and joyful. If you've ever laid in bed at night kind of obsessively thinking about your day and worrying about what's happened in your day, this is because the mind is not quite sure of whether or not you've caused harm in any particular situations. But as you awaken to the natural law of Kamma more and more, you'll get to the point where your mind's steady and stable and calm all through your day, and you'll be able to easily fall asleep at night because you know you haven't caused any harm to anybody. But if in the back of the mind you're not sure whether you've caused harm to people or not, this can obsess the mind. This can cause the mind to have anxiety or fear or other discontent feelings because of the craving, the clinging, the longing, the yearning, the not knowing, that unknowing of true reality. But when you know and you have wisdom that you haven't caused any harm to anyone, you can reside peaceful and joyful. Training day and night. The training to enlightenment, it's a 24-hour-a-day job that as you're working on the mind, yes, you're meditating at certain times, but when you're driving in the car, when you're walking down the street, when you're at work, you're always aware of the mind, making sure that you're only doing wise, wholesome things more and more. but realizing that you will trip and stumble sometimes. That's normal, that's going to occur. And that's how you gradually make your way to enlightenment, that as you trip and stumble, you use those as opportunities to gain wisdom. Whereas if you just brush them to the side and don't take the opportunity to gain wisdom, they're more likely to repeat. So you can train all day and all night in the wholesome states of the mind as you reach out for guidance, as you understand the wisdom of the natural law of Kamma, and you know that you're not causing any harm to others or yourself or both. Let me see if you guys have any questions now that we've covered these three very similar discourses. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 14. Chapter 14 is titled, Do Not Be Judgmental Regarding People. This is something I just kind of mentioned briefly as I was describing that last particular chapter. So here, this is kind of a description of the situation before the Buddha actually starts talking. So the title is, Do Not Be Judgmental Regarding People. The perfectly enlightened one said to the Venerable Ananda, by reason of the female household practitioner, Maigasala, I think that's how you might pronounce her name, I'm not sure. So this student states disagreement to the fortunate one that her father, Purana, was celibate, living apart, abstaining from sexual intercourse, but her parental uncle, Isadatta, was not celibate, not abstaining from sexual intercourse, but lived a contented merry life. When they died, the fortunate one also declared they attained to the state of a once returner and have been reborn in the Tasutta group of heavenly beings. Now the Buddha is speaking. Judgmental people compare them, saying, this one has just the same qualities as the other, so why is one worse and one better? This will be for their lasting harm and suffering. In this case, the person who is sweet-natured and has listened, learned, comprehended theoretically, and found temporary freedom is better and finer than the other person. Why is that? Because the teaching streams carries him along. But who can know this difference except the Tathagata? Therefore, Ananda, do not be judgmental regarding people. Do not pass judgment on people. Those who pass judgment on people harm themselves. I alone, or one like me, may pass judgment on people. Okay, so let me help you guys understand a few different things here. First of all, it's helpful to understand the difference between judgment and discernment. What judgment is judgment is putting yourself above somebody or below somebody and trying to determine what is wholesome or unwholesome for other people and trying to determine whether you're above or below another individual. That is judgment, and that needs to be eliminated from the mind in order to get to enlightenment. What discernment is wise decision making, looking at a situation and making a wise decision that's wise for your life. Not looking down on people, not looking up to people, just making a wise decision for your life. Here, this particular discourse, prior to what you're seeing here, the Buddha was talking with this female household practitioner who was talking about her father and her uncle and comparing them and deciding who was better and who was worse. And the Buddha was saying that they've actually both attained the same stage of enlightenment as a once returner. But this household practitioner was trying to say her father not having any more intercourse versus her uncle who was still having intercourse. Her father was better than her uncle. And the Buddha was saying, no, this isn't true. This isn't actually the way it is, that they were both a once returner. A Buddha is going to be able to determine what stage of enlightenment other people are in, but the average person isn't going to be able to understand that. So by the time the Buddha talks here, he's talking about how it would be very challenging for anyone else to know what stage somebody is in enlightenment other than a Buddha. And that's why he's saying that people should not judge others and try to figure out what stage of enlightenment they're in, because your role is to get to enlightenment yourself, not to measure and compare yourself to where other people are on the path, but instead focus on your own development, and that's what's going to help to get to your liberation and to your enlightenment. So he's saying here that judging and comparing people is essentially going to be harming your own mind and cause your own suffering. And this isn't what you should be doing, a part of this path to enlightenment. And he's saying that this is going to cause harm to yourself if you do this. He's saying him or one like him, meaning an actual Buddha. So him or another Buddha may pass judgment on people. And the judgment that he's talking about here is not putting themselves above or below people. He's talking about determining what stage of enlightenment somebody is in. That a Buddha can look at individuals and determine through the quality of those individuals' minds what stage of enlightenment these beings are in. But that's not something that you would be doing as an individual who's looking to get to enlightenment. A Buddha is only choosing to do this because it actually helps them to provide teachings to their students. Because if one student's a stream enter and another student's a once returner, there might be providing them unique teachings based on the particular stage of enlightenment they're in. Or if one student's in the jhanas and one student's a non-returner, meaning the third stage of enlightenment, there's going to be different teachings there that a Buddha is going to be providing. But they're not looking down on their students. They're instead looking at their mind to be able to know how to help them further and provide them teachings to get to the next part of their journey on the path to enlightenment. So that's why the Buddha is saying, don't be judgmental regarding people. Don't try to look at other people and try to determine what stage of enlightenment they're in. Only be concerned with your own development on the path to enlightenment. So let me see what questions you guys have about this particular chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here, so we'll move on to the next chapter, chapter 15. This one is titled Discontentedness is Dependently Arisen. Okay, this is the Buddha speaking. On one occasion, Ananda, I was residing right here in Rajagaha, in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. Then, in the morning, I dressed, and taking bowl and robe, I entered Rajagaha for alms food. Then it occurred to me, it is still too early to walk for alms food in Rajagaha. Let me go to the park of the wanderers of other communities. Then I went to the park of the wanderers of other communities. I exchanged greetings with those wanderers, and when we had concluded our greetings and cordial talk, I sat down to one side. The wanderers then said to me, as I was sitting to one side, friends, some ascetics and Brahmins, proponents of Kamma, maintain that discontentedness is created by oneself. Some ascetics and Brahmins, proponents of Kamma, maintain that discontentedness is created by another. Some ascetics and Brahmins, proponents of Kamma, maintain that discontentedness is created both by oneself and by another. Some ascetics and Brahmins, proponents of Kamma, maintain that discontentedness has risen randomly, being created neither by oneself nor by another. Now, what does the ascetic Gotama say about this? What does he teach? How should we answer if we are to state what has been said by the ascetic Gotama and not misrepresent him with what is contrary to the truth? And how should we explain in accordance with the teachings so that no reasonable consequence of our assertion would give grounds for criticism? I said, Ananda, that discontentedness is dependently arisen. Dependent on what? Dependent on contact. If one were to speak thus, one would be stating what has been said by me and would not misrepresent me with what is contrary. Okay, so here the Buddha has gone to a particular area. He was going to walk for food, and he was collecting donations to be able to eat. This is how the Buddha ate, is that he just walked down the street, and as people would like to practice generosity and provide him food, that's the food that he would eat. Well, he sat down with these other ascetics of other communities who were learning from other teachers. They weren't learning with him, and they were interested in understanding what it is that the Buddha taught in terms of the natural law of Kamma and what leads to discontentedness. Because these other communities of practitioners, they were also proponents of Kamma, meaning they were supporters of Kamma, but they didn't understand the natural law of Kamma in the same way as a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha. So they might, in their own teachings, be talking about Kamma, they might be discussing discontentedness and these kinds of things, but their clarity in their understanding of the natural law of Kamma and what leads to discontentedness isn't as clear as what the Buddha understands, because he's a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha while they're still on the path and they don't understand 100% of what it takes to actually get to enlightenment. So the Buddha is making it clear here of what he's saying, which is arising discontentedness. Of course, in the Four Noble Truths, in dependent origination, in other places, you're learning about craving, desire, attachment, which is the cause of discontentedness. But here the Buddha is saying, what is discontentedness dependent on? What is needed in order for discontentedness to arise? Well, you already know that craving, desire, attachment needs to exist in the mind in order for there to be discontentedness to arise. But it's also dependent on contact. There needs to be contact through the six sense bases. If you think back to dependent origination that we studied in volume 5, chapter 14, when we discussed the individual steps of dependent origination, those 12 individual factors, it's contact that's in there that's leading to the feelings. That's the dependence, right? So dependent origination goes ignorance to volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, then consciousness, then the name and form, which is the physical body, then the six sense bases, which then leads to contact, which then leads to feelings, craving and clinging, and then it goes on from there, right? So in order for there to be discontentedness, yes, there has to be craving, desire, attachment in the mind, but there also has to be contact through the six sense bases. Any kind of discontentedness that you're going to experience is going to come through one of those six doorways. That's why we call them the doorways to discontentedness. And we talk about guarding the doorways with mindfulness or awareness of mind. Because in order for discontentedness to arise, there needs to be contact through one of those six doorways: the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, or the mind itself. So that's why he's saying here that discontentedness is dependent on contact through one of these six sense bases. He didn't mention the six sense bases here, but if you have that understanding from dependent origination and other teachings, then you know that that's what he's talking about, is that this contact has to come through those six sense bases. So let me see if you have any questions on this particular chapter, chapter 15. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here on chapter 15, so we'll move on to chapter 16. Chapter 16 is titled Walking the Middle Way, Two Extremes That Should Not Be Followed. These are the words of the Buddha. Monks, these two extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness. What two? The pursuit of sensual happiness in sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, not honorable, unbeneficial, and the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, not honorable, unbeneficial. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to wisdom, which leads to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. And what, monks, is that middle way awakened to by the Tathagata, which gives rise to vision, which leads to nibbana or enlightenment? It is this noble eightfold path, that is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Okay, so what the Buddha is talking about here is what he discovered during his journey in his last life and ultimately getting to enlightenment. When he was living in the palace, he was surrounded by sensual pleasures. He had all the greatest entertainment, the most beautiful fabrics, great food, all kinds of amazing things, riches and wealth. And those were certain central pleasures that he indulged in at that particular time. And he realized even with all those things, his mind still wasn't peaceful. It still wasn't calm. It still wasn't serene or content or joyful permanently, because external things don't lead to permanent happiness. So he knew from living as a member of the royal family that indulging in sensual pleasures through sensual desire isn't what leads to the enlightened mental state where you can experience peace and joy. And then he also learned as he was going forward towards enlightenment, where he first started learning with those two teachers, that it wasn't the self-mortification. That's not going to lead to enlightenment either, because those first two teachers, the first 2 years that he was studying, taught him to hang himself upside down from trees, to lay on beds of nails, to pierce his body with metal implements, to starve himself. And he knew that none of those things lead to enlightenment either. So this is why when you're in meditation and you feel pain, you shouldn't just be breathing through the pain. You should adjust your position, because self-mortification, causing pain to the physical body, doesn't actually lead to enlightenment. So those are the two extremes that the Buddha is talking about here, and that's not what leads to enlightenment. Instead, he talks about this middle way, and then he exposes to you what is that middle way here at the end of this discourse, where he explains that those extremes don't lead to enlightenment, but instead this middle way, which is the Eightfold Path, that's what leads to enlightenment. And that's what's guiding you on your journey to enlightenment. That is your life practice, is by learning each one of these individual factors and then practicing them closer and closer, dialing them in closer and closer. That's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. So by you deeply studying the Eightfold Path, using the words of the Buddha and then practicing that, that's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. In Volume 1, Chapter 4 and 5 is where I describe this Eightfold Path in detail, using the words of the Buddha. And you can use the videos and the online classes and audiobooks and all the other resources to help you learn this inside and out, because anybody who's going to get to enlightenment using the teachings of the Buddha would need to know the Eightfold Path inside and out, like the back of their hand. You would need to be able to know this path inside and out, backwards, forwards, left, right, up, and down, and you would gain that through gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And where you're seeing that you're having certain challenges with that, you would then need to dial that in closer and closer. So if you're noticing that your right speech is not quite 100% where you'd like it to be in certain relationships, you're going to need to work on that and dial that in. And where your meditation practice isn't where it needs to be, you're going to need to dial that in. Or other parts of your practice, you're going to need to dial that in closer and closer. And that will bring you to this middle way where the mind can be peaceful and joyful permanently for the rest of this life. So let me know what questions you guys have about this chapter, chapter 16. All right, so it looks like we have a question here coming in on YouTube. The question is, what to do when a desire arises? Okay, so whenever you realize that a craving, desire, attachment has arisen, you would like to cut that off and let it go. If you're doing breathing mindfulness meditation, then you're training your mind to focus on the breath, and whenever it moves off the breath, you're cutting that off and letting it go and coming back to the breath. You're not training the mind to eliminate thoughts. You're training the mind to more readily know that when your mind is off the breath, and then be able to easily let go of whatever the mind has moved off the breath with. So when the mind moves off the breath and you're training it to let go, let go, let go, and maybe you're doing that 10, 20, 50 times a meditation session. If you're meditating for 30 minutes or more, you might be letting go of thoughts up to that number of times. So now in daily life, where you're having mindfulness or awareness of mind and you see the mind longing and yearning towards something, it's pulling in towards the direction of the objects of its affection, you'd like to be able to cut that off and let it go. The more you're meditating and the more accumulation of the benefits of your meditation practice that you have, you'll be easier and easier able to let go of craving, desire, attachments when they're arising. Sometimes what you need to be doing earlier in practice is you might not be able to internally cut off the craving, desire, attachment that's arising. So you might need to redirect the mind. So say you're in a mall and you're sitting in front of a tobacco shop and they sell cigars, and you used to smoke cigars, and you're trying to get rid of the craving for cigars, and you see yourself either walking past the cigar shop or you're sitting near the cigar shop, and you see it, and all of a sudden the craving arises that you want to go in there and get a cigar. Redirect the mind, walk in an opposite direction, go to the bathroom, go get something to eat, leave them all if you need to. Completely redirect the mind. That's what you need to do to cut that off and let it go. Eventually you'll get to the point where you won't need to do that because the craving won't be there. But while you're struggling internally with that craving, sometimes you can't internally cut it off and let it go, that you need to redirect the mind and take it somewhere else in a different direction. So that's what you would like to do, is cut it off and let it go whenever the craving arises. And the more you understand what craving, desire, attachment is, and you're practicing mindfulness, which is awareness of mind, you'll be able to observe when those cravings are arising. Then you can apply right effort from the Eightfold Path to cut it off and let it go. And you're developing that ability through breathing mindfulness meditation. That's all part of the Eightfold Path of what I just described to you. All right, so great question there. Let me see if we have any questions on Facebook. Not seeing any there. So let's go into the next chapter, which is chapter 17. Okay, this one is titled, Past Unwholesome Actions Cannot Be Exhausted with the Performance of Piercing Austerities, Harshness. Now, Mahannama, on one occasion I was living at Rajagaha on the mountain Vulture Peak. On that occasion, a number of Nagasas, I don't know how to pronounce that, living on the black rock of the slopes of Isagula, were practicing continuous standing, rejecting seats, and were experiencing painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to effort. Then, when it was evening, I rose from meditation and went to the Nagatas there. I asked them, friends, why do you practice continuous standing, rejecting seats, and experiencing painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to effort? When this was said, they replied, friend, the Nagda Nataputta is omniscient and all-knowing, and claims to have complete wisdom and vision thus, whether I am walking or standing or sleeping or awake, wisdom and vision are continuously and uninterruptedly present in me. He says thus, Nagatas, you have done unwholesome actions in the past. Exhaust them with the performance of piercing austerities. And when you are here and now restrained in body, speech, and mind, that is, doing no unwholesome actions for the future. So, by obliterating them with asceticism, past actions, and doing no fresh actions, there will be no consequences in the future. With no consequences in the future, there is the destruction of action. With the destruction of action, there is the destruction of discontentedness. With the destruction of discontentedness, there is the destruction of feeling. With the destruction of feeling, all discontentedness will be exhausted. This is the doctrine we approve of and accept, and we are satisfied with it. When this was said, I told them, but friends, do you know that you existed in the past, and that it is not the case that you did not exist? No, friend. But friends, do you know that you did unwholesome actions in the past, and did not abstain from them? No, friend. But friends, do you know that you did such and such unwholesome actions? No, friend. But friends, do you know that so much discontentedness has already been exhausted, or that so much discontentedness has still to be exhausted, or that when so much discontentedness has been exhausted, all discontentedness will have been exhausted? No, friends. But friends, do you know what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of wholesome states is here and now? No, friends. So friends, it seems that you do not know that you existed in the past, and that it is not the case that you did not exist, or that you did unwholesome actions in the past and did not abstain from them, or that you did such and such unwholesome actions, or that so much discontentedness has already been exhausted, or that so much discontentedness has still been exhausted, or that when so much discontentedness has been exhausted, all discontentedness will have been exhausted, or what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of wholesome states is here and now. That being so, those who are murderers, bloody-handed, evildoers in the world, when they are reborn among humans, go forth into homelessness as Naganatas. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce these names and places from 2,500 years ago, but I'm doing my best here. So let me explain what's happening here. So the Buddha is obviously coming in contact with people from other communities of people who are learning all kinds of different things that are far, far, far away from the path to enlightenment and anything that he's teaching and that he knows is going to lead to enlightenment. And when he observes that they're doing these things, he might try to politely, kindly, friendly, respectfully help them see that what they're doing is unwise and is not going to lead to enlightenment. But he's not going to just push his way in and force his way in and kind of force his teachings on them. He's going to observe what's going on, and then he's going to politely maybe ask them some questions to see if it leads to them being interested to cultivate some wisdom that he's able to offer them. And one of the ways that a Buddha might choose to do that is by asking this person questions and helping them see the truth by them answering themselves. So there's these individuals and other communities who are just standing up and rejecting seats and experiencing this painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to just standing there and just standing and standing and standing. They're not choosing to sit down. They're not choosing to take a break. They're doing this very harsh practice of just standing in one place, thinking that if they can put this physical body into these painful, agonizing situations, that it's going to extinguish their unwholesome Kamma from the past. Well, the Buddha was meditating near these people, and when he sees what they're doing, he starts asking them questions as a way to potentially help them. Without just pushing himself in and teaching them, he needs to ask them questions and see if they're open to understanding something further. So he asked them, why do you practice continuous standing, rejecting seats, experiencing painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to effort? Well, what they do is they say that they have this teacher who claims that they are omniscient. What omniscience means is that you know about something that's going to happen before it actually happens. That this person claims to be all-knowing and having this wisdom and vision to understand things. And that this person that has this deep wisdom, which is essentially most likely their teacher, has guided them to think that if they stand there and they put themselves through this harsh practice, that it's going to extinguish their unwholesome actions from the past, their unwholesome Kamma, and it's going to lead them to peace and joy in this life. It's going to help them to destroy their discontentedness because they're no longer performing any unwholesome bodily actions. They're just standing there doing nothing, and they're not harming anyone. But they are harming themselves, it sounds like here, right? So the Buddha asked them, when this was said, but friends, do you know that you existed in the past and that it is not the case that you did not exist? And they say, no, we didn't know that. We didn't know that we existed in the past. So the Buddha knows that they existed in the past and they did unwholesome things in the past. That's what the Buddha says in this next one. Do you know that you did unwholesome actions in the past and you did not abstain from them? And they're like, no, we didn't know that. Right? So they're just thinking that their life is only what they're experiencing in this life. They don't understand past lives and that they did unwholesome things in the past. So they don't understand new Kamma and old Kamma. They don't understand necessarily wholesome and unwholesome Kamma. But friends, do you know that you did such and such unwholesome actions? No, they don't know. They don't know what the unwholesome actions are that they did in the past that led to where they are today in their current life. Do you know that so much discontentedness has already been exhausted, or that so much discontentedness has still to be exhausted, or that when so much discontentedness has been exhausted, all discontentedness will have been exhausted. No, they don't understand that. They don't even understand how much discontentedness has already been exhausted or how much they still need to eliminate in order to fully extinguish all their discontentedness. They have no clue about that aspect of their mind. They don't have a clue about what's going on with the discontentedness in their mind. All they're doing is standing there based on this person telling them that that's what they should be doing. So then the Buddha says, do you know what the abandoning of unwholesome states is and what the cultivation of wholesome states is here and now? And they're like, no, we don't know that, right? They don't even know about cultivating their mind. All they know is standing there and putting themselves in this agony and harshness. So the Buddha is saying, since you don't know those things, essentially he's guiding them to help them understand that the reason why you guys are doing this is because in the past, you guys were murderers, you were bloody-handed, you have now been reborn among human beings, and that's why now you're taking up these aesthetic practices. You're causing all this physical pain to your own body because you caused pain to others in past lives because you were murderers. And now, having done that in your past lives, now in this life, you're causing all this harm to your own body. And then I haven't looked at what happened after this, but I suspect what the Buddha probably did was help them to start to understand the natural law of Kamma and how to actually extinguish it, rather than going through these harsh practices. Because these harsh practices, they don't lead to enlightenment. The Buddha discovered that in his life. If you've done any of these things, you can discover that in this life as well, but you don't need to, because the Buddha already taught us this. And you can practice this middle way of the Eightfold Path and see that that's what indeed leads to enlightenment. Not this aestheticism and not this sensual pleasures either. These austerities of causing harshness to the body, this self-mortification isn't going to lead to enlightenment. And neither is the sensual desires and sensual pleasures. It's the middle way, the Eightfold Path, that leads to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here. So let's move to the next one, which is chapter 18. This one is titled Pleasure and Discontentedness, not only caused by what was done in the past. Again, monks, I said to the Naga, however we're pronouncing that, this group of people, what do you think, friend, when there is intense effort, intense striving, do you then feel pain, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort? But when there is no intense effort, no intense striving, do you then not feel any pain, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort? When there is intense effort, friend Gotama, intense striving, then we feel painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort. But when there is no intense effort, no intense striving, then we do not feel any painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort. So it seems, friend Nagatas, that when there is intense effort, you feel painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort. But when there is no intense effort, you do not feel any painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort. That being so, it is not fitting for the Venerable Naga as this person to declare, whatever this person feels, whether pleasure or pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by what was done in the past. So by obliterating them with aestheticism, past actions, and by doing no fresh actions, there will be no consequences in the future. With no consequences, all discontentedness will be exhausted. If, friend, when there was intense effort, intense striving, then painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort were present, and when there was no intense effort, no intense striving, then painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort were still present. That being so, it would be fitting for the Venerable Nagatanas to declare, Whatever this person feels, all discontentedness will be exhausted. But, sense friend, when there is intense effort, intense striving, then you feel painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort. But when there is no intense effort, no intense striving, then you do not feel painful, agonizing, piercing feelings due to intense effort. You are therefore feeling only the painful, agonizing, piercing feelings of your self-imposed effort, and it is through ignorance, unknowing, and delusion that you mistakenly hold, whatever this person feels, all discontentedness will be exhausted. Speaking thus, monks, I do not see any legitimate defense of their position by the Nagatas. Again, monks, I said to the Nagatas, what do you think, friend Nagatas? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced here and now can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in the next life? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced in the next life can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced here and now? No, friend. What do you think, friend? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced as pleasant can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced as painful? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced as painful can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced as pleasant? No, friend. What do you think, friend? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced in a matured personality can, by effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in an unmatured personality? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced in an unmatured personality can, by effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in a matured personality? No, friend. What do you think, friend? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be much experienced can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be little experienced? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is to be little experienced can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be much experienced? No, friend. What do you think, friend? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is not to be experienced? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is not to be experienced can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced? No, friend. So it seems, friend, that it is impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced here and now, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in the next life, and impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced in the next life can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced here and now. Impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced as pleasant can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced as painful, and impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced as painful can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced as pleasant. Impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced in a mature personality can, by effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in an unmature personality, and impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced in an unmatured personality can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in a matured personality. Impossible that an action whose result is to be much experienced can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be little experienced, and impossible that an action whose result is to be little experienced can through effort and striving become one whose result is to be much experienced. Impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is not to be experienced, and impossible that an action whose result is not to be experienced can, through effort and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced. That being so, the Venerable Nagata's effort is fruitless. Their striving is fruitless. So speak the Nagasas, monk, and because the Nagasas speak thus, these 10 legitimate deductions from their assertions provide grounds for advising them. Thus their effort is fruitless, their striving is fruitless. And how is effort fruitless, monks? How is striving fruitful? And how is effort fruitful, monks? How is striving fruitful? Here, monks, a monk is not overwhelmed by discontentedness, and does not overwhelm himself with discontentedness, and he does not give up the pleasure that accords with the teachings, yet he is not obsessed with that pleasure. He knows thus, when I strive with determination, this particular source of discontentedness fades away in me because of that determined striving, and when I look on with equanimity, this particular source of discontentedness fades away in me while I develop equanimity. He strives with determination in regard to that particular source of discontentedness, which fades away in him because of that determined striving, and he develops equanimity in regard to that particular source of discontentedness, which fades away in him while he is developing equanimity. When he strives with determination, such and such a source of discontentedness fades away in him because of that determined striving. Thus, that discontentedness is exhausted in him. When he looks on with equanimity, such and such a source of discontentedness fades away in him, while he develops equanimity. Thus, that discontentedness is exhausted in him. Again, monks, a monk considers thus, while I live according to my pleasure, unwholesome states increase in me, and wholesome states diminish. But when I exert myself in what is painful, unwholesome states diminish in me, and wholesome states increase. What if I exert myself in what is painful? He exerts himself in what is painful. When he does so, unwholesome states diminish in him, and wholesome states increase. At a later time, he does not exert himself in what is painful. Why is that? The purpose for which that monk exerted himself in what is painful has been achieved. That is why at a later time he does not exert himself in what is painful. Thus, too, monks, the effort is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. All right, so this is a very long discourse here where the Buddha is starting off helping these same people from the last discourse, walking them through various aspects to help them see that their effort and striving, putting themselves through this painful, agonizing, piercing feelings, isn't going to produce anything fruitful because they're just causing harm to the physical body. And that's what he does throughout this whole entire thing until he gets down to the point where he's talking to the monks about how to apply effort that is fruitful and striving that is fruitful. So here, what he's saying is, don't become overwhelmed with discontentedness. When you're experiencing anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment, jealousy, any of those discontent feelings, stress, anxiety, don't become overwhelmed with those, right? That's important to understand that these feelings are impermanent. That you also do not give up on certain pleasures, right? There's no harm in enjoying a piece of chocolate cake. But what you're looking to do is not allow the mind to crave and cling to this chocolate cake, wanting it to be permanent. So therefore, when you don't have it anymore, now the mind becomes discontent. It becomes irritated, frustrated, agitated, or what have you. So as you train your mind, you're going to experience discontentedness, but you should notice gradual diminishing of that discontentedness as you're making your way closer and closer to enlightenment. So the Buddha is saying that you don't allow your mind to be obsessed with that pleasure. That's why if you're having a piece of chocolate cake and you know that you're enjoying that chocolate cake, okay, there's a piece of chocolate cake, it tastes really great, outstanding, but don't become obsessed by it. Don't crave it, don't long for it, don't yearn for it. And there'll be other things like that too. You'll have a friend that comes over and visits you, or spends a few days with you, or maybe a family member comes and stays with you, and you'll thoroughly enjoy their company. It'll be great, the number of conversations you have, the types of topics that you'll be discussing, but don't allow your mind to crave and cling to this, because this experience is impermanent. They're going to at some point be gone, and you're going to be there at home alone again. Whereas if you crave and you cling to this experience, then you're going to be lonely and bored when they're gone. So enjoy the moment, enjoy the present moment with your friends or family or the piece of chocolate cake or whatever you're doing. If you're on holiday, if you're on vacation, enjoy that, but just know that it's impermanent and you're going to be moving on. So don't become obsessed with whatever that is. Don't allow the mind to get those conditioned pleasant feelings. So then as you continue to strive through your training, you remain determined and you don't allow the discontentedness to obsess the mind. You train the mind to cut that off and let it go. That's what we were talking about on the past question that was asked from YouTube. What you'll notice is this discontentedness starts to gradually fade away. That's what the Buddha is talking about here. That you'll notice that as you continue to strive, your discontentedness will continue to diminish. And what you would like to do is, the Buddha says, look on with equanimity. What he means here is train the mind to have equanimity. Arise this equanimity, this calmness and this composure. So even though you might observe your mind starting to move into those pleasant feelings when you're talking with your friend or family member who's come to visit you, restrain the mind and pull that back and look on with equanimity. Train the mind to reside with calmness and composure in that situation and realize that this experience is impermanent. Enjoy it for the present moment, but don't allow the mind to become obsessed with it. And then ultimately what he gets down to here is he talks about, at a later time, while I live according to my pleasure, unwholesome states increase in me and wholesome states diminish. So when you allow your mind to have those conditioned pleasant feelings and you allow the mind to chase those, you'll notice that your unwholesome states, your unwholesome decisions, your unwise decisions, they will increase. You'll notice that as you're chasing pleasures, your concentration will decrease, your mindfulness will decrease, your ability to think through challenges and struggles will decrease, and your unwholesome states will increase. So these wholesome mental states of concentration and mindfulness and others will continue to diminish, while your unwholesome states will increase as you allow your mind to take on conditioned pleasant feelings based on craving, desire, attachments. But when I exert myself in what is painful, unwholesome states diminish and wholesome states increase. What he's talking about here is when you're restraining the mind from your cravings, desires, attachments, it can be quite painful for the mind, right? It's not that you're trying to cause pain to the physical body like these other people were doing that at the beginning, where they're standing, they're putting themselves through this agony to just be in physical pain. But instead, what you're going to experience is, because you've allowed the mind to get conditioned pleasant feelings and you have craving and clinging, as you're training your mind to let those things go, it can be quite painful. So if you have a child, or you have like coffee or alcohol, or some other thing that you are craving and clinging to, as you're training your mind to let those things go, it can be quite painful for you. But As you go through that pain, what you're going to notice is your unwholesome states are going to diminish and your wholesome states are going to increase. And this is all going to be mental pain. It's not going to be physical pain unless you're going through like withdrawal symptoms of some kind of drug or stimulant or something like that. It's going to be this mental pain of letting go of things. It's going to be really challenging and the mind's going to be really struggling, right? Because what you're doing is you're exerting yourself in what is painful, which is eliminating craving and clinging. Eliminating craving, desire, attachment is quite painful as you're going through it. But you have these different tools made available to you that you should be learning and practicing that helps to ease that pain. You're exerting yourself in what is painful, which is a letting go of those craving, desire, attachments. And when you do so, your unwholesome states will diminish and your wholesome states will increase. Okay? But then at a later time, you do not need to exert yourself in what is painful. Because you've already eliminated your cravings, desire, attachments, there's not going to be any more pain. As you let go of the coffee, maybe the alcohol, maybe the other things that your mind's holding on to, while you're letting go of it, it can be quite painful. But when you get to the other side of that, that's where the liberation is. There won't be any pain there. That's what I usually talk about, like walking through the fire. You got to get to the other side to appreciate the fresh air. You've got to walk through the fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. That's what the Buddha is describing here. That once you go through that fire and you experience what's painful, letting go of those craving, desire, attachments, once you let go of all of that and you get out of the fire, you can appreciate the fresh air on the other side. So at a later time, you don't need to exert yourself in what is painful. Why is that? Because the purpose for which the monk exerted himself in what is painful, which is eliminating those cravings, desires, attachments, has been achieved. That is why at a later time he does not exert himself in what is painful, right? Because there's no more pain. There's no more mental pain because you've already eliminated all your cravings, desires, attachments. But you need to strive and apply effort to eliminate those cravings, desires, attachments. And as you do, this is very fruitful because once you get to the other side of letting go of all those cravings and clinging, now you'll get to the point where your mind's liberated and there's no more mental pain. And that's what the Buddha is saying is fruitful, is applying the effort and striving and being determined to eliminate the cravings, desires, attachments. Exerting yourself in that type of painfulness is fruitful. Where just standing there putting your body through physical pain isn't fruitful. But training your mind to eliminate the cravings, desires, attachments, which can be painful at times, that is fruitful. That's what's going to lead to your liberation. So any questions on this chapter? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 19. This one is titled, All That Is Caused by What Was Done in the Past. Monks, there are these three sectarian tenets, which, when questioned, interrogated, and cross-examined by the wise, and taken to their conclusion, will remain stuck in a doctrine of inaction. What are the three? 1. There are, monks, some ascetics and Brahmin, who hold such a doctrine in view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by what was done in the past. 2. There are other ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine in view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by God's creative activity. 3. And there are still other ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine in view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that occurs without a cause or condition. Monks, when I approach those ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine in view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by past deeds, and I say to them, is it true that you venerable ones hold such a doctrine in view? When I ask them this, they affirm it. Then I say to them, in such a case, is it due to past deeds that you might destroy life, take what is not given, indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehood, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter, that you might be full of longing, have a mind of ill will, and hold wrong view? Those who fall back on past deeds as the essential truth have no interest to do what should be done and to avoid doing what should not be done, nor do they make an effort in this respect. Since they do not apprehend as true and valid anything that should be done or should not be done, they are muddle-minded, they do not guard the mind, and even the personal designation aesthetic could not be legitimately applied to them. Okay, let me explain what the Buddha is sharing here. He's setting up some other discourses that he's going to share in other chapters after this, but then he's going into detail on one aspect here. What he's talking about is these three things that people essentially believe during his lifetime, which are wrong view, which are causing people to be stuck in a doctrine of inaction, meaning they don't understand the natural law of Kamma. A doctrine of inaction means that they don't understand action and result, or cause and effect. So he's saying that there's these three sectarian tenets, these three things that people believe, that when questioned, interrogated, and cross-examined by the wise and taken to their conclusion, that these individuals are going to stay stuck in this thoughts and these beliefs of inaction, and that it's not their current actions that are leading to some result. It's some other thing outside of the natural law of Kamma that is causing everything that they're experiencing. And what the Buddha is helping people to see during his lifetime is that it's this natural law of Kamma that they need to understand. They need to understand this cause and effect and action and result, the results of your decisions, not punishment and rewards, not a mystical, magical thing, but instead this cause and effect, this action and result, the results of your decisions. And he's helping people to see that it's right now in the present moment that the choices and decisions that you make, either wise or unwise, are going to lead to some wholesome or unwholesome result. But here are the three things that people believed in during that time. And today, there's still people who believe in these things. The first one is that there's ascetics and Brahmins, and there's ascetics and Brahmins nowadays, and there's household practitioners as well, who hold such a doctrine and view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, that's the discontentedness in the mind, those conditioned feelings, all that is caused by what was done in the past. So things that you did in your past life is what's causing your anger now. The things that you did in your past life is what's causing your sadness now. What you did in your past life is what's causing your guilt or your shame or your fear. And the Buddha ultimately gets to, in this discourse and others, that that's not true. That's not what causes discontentedness. But there's people who believe that it's what they did in the past. And if somebody holds this doctrine in view, that means that they can't solve their problem right now in this present life, because if their discontentedness is based on things that they did in the past, you can't go back to the past and fix that. So that means they're going to stay stuck in their discontentedness because they don't understand what's causing it. They think what's causing it is based in the past, and as long as they keep believing in this, then they're not going to do what they need to do in the present moment in order to fix it. And that's what the Buddha ultimately gets to in this particular discourse. The second thing he says here is that there's ascetics and Brahmins, and this is true today too, as well as household practitioners, that hold such a doctrine in view of whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by God's creative activity. Meaning God is the one who is causing people to be angry or sad or frustrated or irritated. All the things that we experience in terms of our mind is being caused by God. And there's people who believe this today. And if somebody truly believes that, and they continue to hold on to that without being able to see the truth, that it's craving, desire, attachment that's causing their discontentedness, then they would never be able to fix it, because they can't get God to change what's going on in their mind if they truly believe that. That's not what's actually occurring. We know that the mind is causing its own discontentedness, but as long as one holds wrong view, thinking that God is the one who's causing them to experience discontentedness, then they're going to stay stuck in this discontentedness. Then the third one that the Buddha brings up here, again, ascetics, Brahmins, and householders, even today, have the same view, is that whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that occurs without a cause or condition. That there is no reason why it's occurring. It's just occurring because it's occurring, right? Well, there again, somebody doesn't understand what's causing the discontent feelings, so they wouldn't actually be able to eliminate them. So the Buddha goes on to explain to these ascetics and Brahmins how this first one, that is in the first tenet, is one of wrong view, and that it's not things from the past that is causing discontentedness now. Even though those people firmly believe that, they're affirming with the Buddha that yes, that's indeed what we believe. The discontentedness that we're experiencing is because of what we did in our past. The Buddha then goes on to says, okay, well, based on what you did in the past, is that why you're destroying life now? Is that why you're taking what is not given now? Is that why you indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehoods, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter? You're full of longing, that's craving, desire, attachment. Have a mind of ill will, that's anger, hatred, and ill will. And hold wrong view, that's the ignorance, the delusion, the unknowing of true reality. So he goes through these things and says, is it because of everything you did in the past that you're doing these things now? And if that's the case, and that's what you truly believe, then you're not really on this path to enlightenment, is what he basically gets to. Is he says that you aren't seeing the truth here, and you're not interested in doing what should be done or avoiding doing what should not be done. You're not making an effort right now in the present moment to abolish all of these unwholesome things that you're doing, because you think everything you're doing now is based on the past, when in reality you're doing harmful things right now, and you need to fix the things that you're doing right now. And this is where he eventually says, since they do not apprehend as true and valid anything that should be done or should not be done, they are muddle-minded, meaning they're confused. Their mind is lacking concentration, that they don't have clarity and focus. They don't guard their mind with mindfulness. They don't watch out for their mind and ensure that they're being aware of the mind. And even the personal designation aesthetic could not be legitimately applied to them. During the lifetime of the Buddha, if you're an ascetic, you're on the path to enlightenment. So what he's saying is you're not even on the path to enlightenment if you think that things from the past is what's causing your discontentedness now. You don't even know the first step of the Four Noble Truths, of right view, of craving, desire, attachment is what's causing discontentedness. So if you don't even know right view and you don't even know the first step of the path to enlightenment, then you can't even consider yourself on the path to enlightenment. So that's what he's getting to here. Let me see what questions you guys have on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come in here. So let's move to chapter 20, which is the last chapter for today. This is a continuation of that previous chapter. And then chapter 21 is also a continuation of that previous chapter as well. He's going into detail here about that second thing on that list. And here the title is, All is Caused by God's Creative Action. Then, monks, I approach those ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine in view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by God's creative activity. And I say to them, is it true that you venerable ones hold such a doctrine in view? When I ask them this, they affirm it. Then I say to them, in such a case, is it due to God's creative activity that you might destroy life, take what is not given, indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehoods, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter, that you might be full of longing, have a mind of ill will, and hold wrong view? Those who fall back on God's creative activity as the essential truth have no interest to do what should be done and to avoid doing what should not be done, nor do they make an effort in this respect. Since they do not apprehend as true and valid anything that should be done or should not be done, they are muddle-minded. They do not guard the mind, and even the personal designation aesthetic could not be legitimately applied to them. So once again, he's going through the same details, that if somebody believes that what they're experiencing in this present life is all because of God, everything is happening because of God, they're just destined to the fate of whatever God decides, then they're not looking at true reality of what's going on right now in the present moment. They're not understanding the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect. So if there's individuals like this, which there are plenty in the world, we're not judging them, we're not looking down on them, we're not thinking that they're bad people, but just understand that if you hold this particular belief, then you're going to need to let that go. You're going to need to let go that thinking that God has this certain destiny for you that he's laid out, and you've got to fulfill whatever he wants. Instead, what you're looking to do is get more and more in touch with the natural law of Kamma and realize that whatever you experience in life is a result of your decisions. There's cause and effect, or action and results here. And wise decisions lead to wholesome results. Unwise decisions lead to unwholesome results. So if we just believe that everything that we're experiencing, we're just subjected to God's will, this is untrue, but it's going to leave us trapped, where we're essentially robots and we can't do anything to fix our life because everything's up to God. Well, that's not the way that would lead to an improved life and an improved condition of mind. You've got to be able to see this cause and effect, or action and result. And by seeing that truth, then you'll be willing to take action to then improve your wisdom, which will lead to wise decisions and wholesome outcomes. So let me see if you guys have any questions here. Not seeing anything anywhere. All right. So what I'll do then is just thank you guys for joining for today's class, and remind you that next week we're going to be in the next set of chapters, chapter 21 through chapter 30 in this same volume, volume 6, the natural law of Kamma. And we're going to be studying those chapters. So if you would like to study them this week, it can prepare you to come to class if you have any questions of clarification. And then for those of you guys that have been around, you guys know that there's the words of the Buddha, there's the reference that goes back to the original source if you need to look back at that. And then there's words from me as well that will help you to further reflect and further understand the words of the Buddha. So you might decide to read maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, which will help you over the period of the week to get through all the 10 chapters. It'll probably take you an hour, hour and a half total, but you're not interested in sitting down and doing all that reading at one time, because it's like taking a big bite. You would like to take smaller bites, 10, 15, 20 minutes, chew on that for a day or two, digest it, and then move on to the next 10, 15, 20 minutes to digest. And that's what will help you to gradually bring in the teachings into the mind and gradually arise this wisdom. And then I'll be here to help you as you need that, because this study group is exactly that. It's more of a study group rather than me teaching you each individual aspect of what the Buddha's teaching you. That's what I use the books for. And then I use these classes to give you guys a chance to ask any questions that you like. So thank you all for joining for today's class. Tomorrow in the group learning program, we're going to be in the frequently asked questions section of volume 1. That's where you're going to be learning about the individual frequently asked questions that many students have, and you'll be able to then get help on that if you would like to learn those details. And then of course on Wednesday we're going to be doing loving kindness meditation together, and you're welcome to join for that. So I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.